Hello again, my friends. Thank you for joining us on the conversation. I'm your host, Ryan Campbell. I'm here today joined with Dan Hawks. Dan is the Chief Probation Officer for Tuolumne County, and I'm really excited to speak to you because this is an area of law enforcement that I think a lot of people aren't as familiar with. You know, people think of, Kojak and the detectives out there catching criminals, but what happens after that? The majority of people that are incarcerated, they're not serial killers that are going to be in prison for the rest of their life. Most of them are people who are low to moderate level offenses. Mm-hmm. Someday their term's going to end. They're going to get out of jail, and your job is to make sure that they have the tools to succeed back again in society. Did I do a good job kind of illustrating what you do?
I think you're hitting it right on the head. And thanks for having me, by the way. I do appreciate being here because I do think oftentimes people don't know what we do, or when they hear probation, it's sort of like, oh, that sounds like an interesting job.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit more about what we do. And one thing I'd say is, the law enforcement officer, when they make an arrest or when they solve a case, oftentimes their work is done, and really that's when our job's just beginning. Because with regards to juveniles that are detained and brought into custody, they immediately have to be brought to the probation officer as required by code, and we're responsible for housing any juvenile in detention, and then we also work very closely with the courts, other law enforcement agencies. Often behind the scenes, we make recommendations in court on all felony matters. And any juvenile matter that's going to juvenile court, or whenever the minor is actually detained, then we'll be looking at, what's the least restrictive environment, what's the best way we can handle this situation, can we release the juvenile back home? So we're involved in making recommendations and planning discharge and release for anyone. We also work with our adult population as well. We run a pretrial program through probation, and that anytime anyone's arrested, we're doing risk assessments, scientifically validated tools to determine, what risk does this person pose, and then making recommendations upon, whether or not the individual should stay in custody, whether they can be released safely, whether they can be released on electronic monitoring, whether they need to be released with an alcohol monitoring device, that kind of thing, while they're pending the legal proceedings. So we're involved in a lot of different things. We're not often always visible, but so I appreciate being here today.
Yeah, well, that's what I think is so great, and why I really wanted to speak to you is that, unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand what probation does until they or a family member is in the system and in that probation system.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's two levels. Mm-hmm. One is you're working with the person that's in the probation system to try and get them back, but you're also sort of that protection for the community that, if this person really isn't doing what they need to be doing, if they look like maybe some of these other programs aren't right for them, you're kind of that last stop.
Sure. And we've all had loved ones or family members, I'm sure, that have been justice involved, and we all want what's best for that person in the long term. If that person is going to have a chance of success on the outside, we need to make sure that they're getting the services they need and that their needs are being addressed. And so I think, any person that has, a loved one or dealt with somebody that has, had a drug or alcohol problem and needed that extra level of intervention, really that's what probation provides. We help people get through the system, hopefully coming out successfully. We also hold the line there too with accountability when, they aren't abiding by terms and conditions that the court's ordering. So, it's one of the key factors with probation is that we work as sort of the law enforcement arm of the court, enforcing those court orders that are made.
So how does that work? Does the judge call you, or does the district attorney call you to perform those things? Do
some of them are
statutorily
prescribed. We do issue a lot of warrants. We're very active. I mean, a lot of what we do is based upon risk, and we try to assess risk and make sure that we're paying attention to the riskier cases. And so sometimes, if in pretrial we're making recommendations to the judge, it's always through the judge that we're working through, and the judge will make the orders, and then we do our best to enforce them. So if someone's placed on electronic monitoring in the community, it's becoming because the judge is releasing them on that. And so then it becomes our responsibility to monitor and make sure that that person is doing what they're supposed to be doing, or not violating any restraining orders or protective orders are in place. I mean, those are the kind of key things that we look at, and we do monitor that 24/7. And those are the kinds of situations that we're most concerned about, are where there's a potential for violence or putting people at risk. And so we're actively in the community. Just yesterday, we back up law enforcement. We responded to the school incident, the lockdown at the high school, and so we actively support other law enforcement agencies and can act as law enforcement as needed. While we're on duty, we are peace officers. We have some armed officers, and so. Depending on level of risk, we're out there in the community, also making sure that people are abiding by their terms and conditions, not putting neighbors at risk, those kinds of things.
And then you mentioned the lockdown at the high school recently, and since that's kind of fresh on everybody's memory, what was that like? And is there anything you can tell us about, what happened? Or, because I guess they haven't, there wasn't a shooter, and they're not quite sure yet where that.
I'm not quite sure what the circumstances will be. I'm sure that they'll be releasing some information about that. But for me personally, on a personal level, I have a freshman, son that goes to the high school, and so hearing that report was concerning. And then I also heard that we had 3 units for probation officers that were out in the field that responded, immediately to the scene to provide backup support. And so, obviously I was concerned for my staff. I'm concerned for my son, and just like everybody else in this community, it is concerning that's, what we have to deal with these days.
But yeah, it's kind of the world as it is, and not necessarily what we would want it to be.
But what I would say is that I am grateful, living in this community, to know that we all work so well together, law enforcement. There were so many different agencies that responded.
I never knew there were so many cop cars in this county.
Right.
So I was on Washington Street, driving up Washington Street to go to the county building, and it seemed like every cop car within 100 miles was coming up the road. And
from other counties, they were coming as well. And so it's great that I think that that's what you get in a small town and county like Tuolumne County, and that's and people can take heart in that the sheriff and DA and probation, we all work really well together, and there isn't that sort of interagency fighting I think that you'd see in some other locations.
Does that happen? Why is that? Because it's like you're in the same general area, but you're different departments. Is that kind of what?
Well, I think things could be bad, but we're all very fortunate that we have good people in those respective roles, I think, and that obviously I think it probably comes down to, we all think our agency is deserving of a bigger piece of the potential pie than others, or it comes down to resources. But I think we all understand that we're all on the same team, and so we're not gonna do that with each other, and that we support each other. And the sheriff was very appreciative of our response, as was the chief of police, so we work well together. And I think one of the reasons we work well together is because we have different networks where we get together, but one of them is the Community Corrections Partnership, which I'm lucky enough to sit as chair of. But we meet regularly, and we address issues specific to realignment and criminal justice, the adult population. And so we have to come together every year and formulate a plan on how we best think to, spend and utilize the state's funding for those programs, knowing that there isn't enough to do everything we want to do.
Yeah.
But, we somehow have to come together with a good plan.
So, and you mentioned realignment, and I want to get back to that. But before we do, I just kind of want to know, just nuts and bolts, how many staff, how big is your department? How many staff do you have? And what's the size of the population that you serve? I guess, I don't know if do you call them clients, or what the terminology is there?
Yeah, I mean, we've...
How many customers
Well,
do you
terms
have?
have changed. There used to be probationers,
So
and
how
then
much
that wasn't
staff and
good
how
enough.
many?
Yeah, so we have 47 staff, and almost 20 of our staff are peace officers. So, and we have of our 47, we have 16 that are dedicated to the juvenile facility, which isn't a whole lot, really. But the rest all serve the other population, the juvenile probation population and the adult probation population.
Yeah.
So.
And how big are those populations?
Well, typically we have at any given time about 1,000 adults that were on active supervision. I think it's a little lower than that right now, but it's quite a bit. And like I said, we do focus on risk, and so there may be lower level offenders that are coming to us just because they need to do work release. We also run the work release programs, or we also monitor community service hours for the court. So we have people referred to us for all kinds of things where it's on a lesser level, and so we aren't as actively involved in supervision with those populations. And so yeah, 1,000, but that's across all of the different areas and things that we serve.
Still, that's a huge caseload. I mean, if you're talking 47 staff overall, 16 are in the juvenile center, and then you have your support staff. So really, you have a core group of maybe, I don't know, 20 or so that are really monitoring that.
Well, you're absolutely right, Ryan. And I think that's an important point to make. And also on top of that, I'd say that currently we're down 3 juvenile detention officers, juvenile correctional officers, and we're down 3 deputy probation officers. And so, it's become harder for us to recruit. I think our county actually pays better than a lot of counties, and that we've seen that people really can progress through our department and do well. So for those community members out there that are looking for jobs, take a look at us. I mean, it can be a very rewarding career, but we have awesome staff. I mean, we really do. I'm so proud of the work that we do and the officers that work for me. Yeah. And so it really all comes down to them. But.
Yeah. Well, and I did want to get back to realignment. So you brought that up. What is realignment, and how has it impacted, both our local jail, our juvenile center, and just kind of the work that probation does?
Well, just realignment in general, just to, in my opinion, realignment means, the state no longer wants to continue doing something, and so they know it would probably be better for them to give those duties and responsibilities back to the locals, and try to find a way to not pay us as much to do the work. And so that's always the concern and the rub, really, and
you're referencing, so the state wanted to reduce the population in the state prison system,
right?
And they've done that, so good for them.
Successfully, yes.
Yes, they've done that successfully. But the way that they did that is a lot of the offenses that would typically garner a prison sentence are now being passed down to the local jails.
Right.
So that means they're being passed to you, passed to the sheriff, passed on to our local jail and our probation system. How has that impacted you?
Well, I think we've done a great job. I mean, on the one hand, I think something had to give at the state level. I understand that we had our prisons that were bursting at the seams. There were lawsuits galore, and that the state was forced to either make mass releases with nothing or come up with a more comprehensive plan. I think realignment. It has gone well in this county because we have come together through community corrections partnerships and formulated plans to really do good work. And so I think we continue to do that. I think that for us, I think it makes better sense because I don't think parole was necessarily, not because they weren't trying hard, but the way it's set up for small counties, you have a parole office that's, in Modesto or Ceres. And so for the counties near us, all around us, there aren't any, parole agents in our community. They're coming in and trying to supervise these populations. To me, it makes sense to shift some of that responsibility back to us, the locals that were also supervising the same populations oftentimes. And where they didn't necessarily have programming in place, like Day Reporting Center, GEO, like we have, we do, and we are able to fund some of those programs using those state dollars. So really, I think it did provide rehabilitative services or the funding for that for our populations. And it just sort of made sense in a lot of ways, I think, to have people that are already doing some of the work take on a larger share of that work with some of the state funding to do it. And so I think in some ways it made sense, and it continues to make sense for us. But it's not always great. I mean, the most recent one we're dealing with right now is juvenile justice realignment. And, basically, there used to be California Youth Authority, Department of Juvenile Justice, which is, it's prison for kids is really what it is. And they don't have a great track record. And there have been a lot of problems there, a lot of lawsuits and same sorts of issues. But on the other hand, if you have some very serious juvenile offenders with very serious issues, that used to be where counties would send them. So, now those responsibilities have all been put back on the counties. There is no state prison for juveniles anymore. Yeah. So it's which also, I mean, is good thing that we have a juvenile facility because we can meet a lot of those needs locally.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and you kind of touched on something that's been that I've observed, and I think a lot of people observed, is even here locally in Tuolumne County, we've had some really, and we don't have to go into specifics. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, but we've had some really high-profile, terrible, violent crimes committed by juveniles. Mm-hmm. And I don't recall that happening. Maybe it's happened in the past. I don't know, but it certainly never happen with the frequency that it seems to be happening now.
Yeah.
I mean, you work with these kids. What is causing it? What has changed?
Yeah, and I wish I could. I wish I knew the answer to that. I think we've always had, youth with a lot of needs. Substance abuse has always been a problem. Whatever drugs are available for adults, we see our youth using, which is concerning. I'm a father, parent too, and I'm concerned about what's out there. But yeah, the high level, the violent nature, we're seeing some significant crimes, and I think we're very fortunate that we have services to meet those needs and address them. But it doesn't mean that we're always able to prevent them from occurring. We're stepping in and getting involved oftentimes after something bad's already happened, and so it's hard to predict. But we do know that our youth are dealing with some very significant issues. That our youth have a lot of prior trauma, a lot of prior maybe CWS or other law enforcement contact. And
so Probation came and did a presentation to the Board of Supervisors recently about Child Abuse Awareness Month. Mm-hmm. Why is this probation kind of central to this question of how to raise awareness of child abuse? What can you tell me about just kind of the concept of Child Abuse Awareness Month?
Well, we are a child protective agency. We work closely with Child Welfare Services. They're definitely one of our allied agencies that we work with. And actually, I can say that the Chief Probation Officer was actually the original Child Protective Services in Tuolumne County. The Chief Probation Officer used to handle dependency matters, going way, way back. But so we've always been interested in that and concerned about that. And our youth oftentimes have significant prior history with that system, the dependency system. And
Do you see kids kind of start, in child welfare services and they sort of graduate through the system?
unfortunately, yes. I mean, I think and I think that's kind of, I think what we used to see was there would be a progression from, the child dependency system into probation and then right into the adult criminal system. And, that does still happen.
How do you break that?
I think that we're actually doing a really good job now where we're getting youth prepared for life on their own oftentimes. And that's, we try to find family members to place with. We do all the same things that our, child welfare agency does, social workers do. Often our youth are a little older and sometimes a little bit more involved in their behavior. So, we're often working towards the same aim and working cooperatively with them. I mean, we have great relationships with them where if they're the agency that is the better agency and the youth that we're dealing with is no longer representing crimes or showing those sorts of concerns, they can actually take over and be the placing agency and the lead agency. And we have a number of cases like that, where we're not fighting with each other about, oh, this is your problem, this is our problem. It's more a cooperative effort, where we all work together and come to usually, similar recommendations. And, likewise, if there are cases where there is some criminal justice involvement with the youth, there's also an understanding that they can be the better agency to handle things. If we don't need to get involved, we won't get involved. And sometimes we'll partner with them as sort of, the silent partner, and they can handle things. But if issues continue to progress, then maybe it becomes a probation case and we have to get involved. We're always trying to find the least restrictive way to deal with, those kinds of behaviors and help reintegrate youth into our community. So, it hasn't always been so great on that regard with our agencies. And so, having been here for, 20 plus years now, I've seen the progression. We've really become great working partners. Yeah. And so, things are going well, I think.
Yeah. And Chief Hawks, you've been doing this a long time, right?
23 years.
23 years. So, you mentioned that it's a really rewarding career, and clearly you have a lot of passion for it. Is there something that stands out in your mind that kind of illustrates why this is such a rewarding career, and how you're able to work in the community and really see what you do helping people?
Sure. Well, I mean, I often run into people that I used to supervise, and it is very rewarding to have them acknowledge that they're doing great. And, maybe you're standing in the line at Walmart but they want to tell you all the great things that are happening in their life, or how their son has really turned it around, or this and that. And I've seen that many times. Yeah. It is a good feeling to know that people do come out on the other side. I mean, in the probation industry, we're often reminded of our failures because it's the people that reviolate, they come back, and we tend to see our failures more than our success stories. But they are definitely out there, and I just the other day ran into somebody that used to supervise, and there happened to be a couple of other retired probation officers at the Save Mart, and this individual was one of our first graduates through the DRC program, somebody that we didn't give a whole lot of chance at success, but has not had any reoffense issues, and he stayed out of trouble. And it was very rewarding to have him greet us and say, "It's probation day at St. Mart," and to see that this is a normal functioning person now, and they've come a long way, and it can be like that. I mean, just going back a little bit further, I can tell you. My dad was involved in the juvenile justice system. He graduated from CYA in high school at CYA, and I know that was a source of shame for him, and he didn't want me to ever get involved in the system. But I recently ran across some pictures. I kind of forgot about that, and I know that that was probably one of the reasons I went into the field that I did. Is that I know that my dad used to say he always wanted to be a probation officer,
Yeah.
but because he had gotten in trouble, he didn't think he could, and he good dad, working blue collar guy, but. I think sometimes we don't realize that what our motivations were. But I came across some pictures of seeing him in Preston, Ione, with my grandmother. They were visiting him, and he was in custody. And I'm like, wow, I forgot about that.
Is your dad still with us?
No, he just passed away. And that's why I was looking through pictures and I came across that. My aunt.
How proud must he have been of you then?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thought that went through my mind. And, knowing that right now we're dealing with, the closure of DJJ or CYA, it kind of all brought it back home. It's like, well, this is pretty cool that, I've been able to do this. And I'm sure that must have been my motivation for going into this.
That's pretty insightful that it's kind of like it takes years to really realize what drove you in a particular direction.
And it all brought it home, and just running across that picture, and
and going back to the Motherwell Juvenile Detention Facility, that was a real controversial thing when it started. It took years to get the money to build it, and then there was a lot of acrimony over whether or not to build it. Cost a lot of money. People weren't sure, was it too big? Was it too small? Where were the kids going to come from?
Sure.
How do you feel it's operating now?
Well,
since,
I guess
I guess there's always still a little bit, but for the most part, it seems to have died down.
Sure, I hope so, and I don't think it should be controversial. I think the attention we were getting and the pressure that was put on us,
And just for context, your predecessor, Linda Downing, you were the chief deputy probation officer, so you were right there while this was going on. How was that? And then she retired right after the facility was completed, and so then. You had the hot potato at that time, and it was kind of your job to make this thing successful after all this work went into getting the thing built. Right.
Well, I mean, one of the first things I was tasked with as the new chief was come up with a closure plan. And so I was like, what? So, but, Linda helped build a really great program. The programming there was fantastic. And the services we provide our youth, are top notch. I think the problem is we weren't bringing in the regional partners like we needed to, and that was no easy task. And I think it really took, the threat or the possibility of closure to get those partnering counties to the table. We renegotiated our rates for them. We increased them to be closer to what actual costs are, what our actual costs would be to serve the youth. And and I will say credit to them. They all stepped up, and the way we restructured our contracts with them provided revenue to the county, whether they were actually using their beds or not, which before it was just sort of like, you only paid if you used it, and they weren't paying anywhere near what it really costs for that to provide that service. So,
how do you feel the finances are now?
I think we're doing a great job. I mean, I think we're saving the county money for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, looking at it, and even the CAO, recognized that in this last budget cycle. She pointed that out. The cost is really now, if we would have gone out of the county, if we would have closed the facility down, we would definitely be paying more for those services out of county. And we wouldn't be getting near as good of programming or service that we are providing now for our youth. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, that pressure was intense and was unexpected as the new chief, but I appreciate that.
Yeah, I was in some of those meetings. Got pretty heated sometimes.
And I think I know that I could tell you were on the fence. You weren't sure whether we.
I always supported the concept. It was the money side of things, and one of the first, probably the first conversation we ever had was about that issue of the agreements with the neighboring counties. And I can't tell you how proud and how much respect I have for you. You went out and really hustled to make that happen. And just looking at the change from where the financials were, you know.
Well, it all worked out. You know, I never could have.
We're talking within 4 years.
I appreciate that.
That's a short period of time for a multi-million-dollar center to be.
And I appreciate you gave us a chance at the time, because I could tell you were one of you were on the fence, and I know as were a lot of the board members.
I was looking at it just like I think a lot of the people in the public, where we were cutting funding for libraries and for our parks, and then moving and it became that, which I hate to see, and I try never to do that now, but at the time it was very much framed as we're giving up one thing for another thing, and now you're sort of operating as your own independent,
the revenue that's coming in
revenue
really
side of
it's better,
it's
way
much more
better than
independent.
it ever was, and every year we've increased it, and we're looking to increase rates again. We're looking at it every year, and once we finally got our county partners in there, now they just ask for more beds, and we're now at a point where I've got Inyo County asking me for 3 guaranteed beds all the time. They went from 0.5 to wanting 3, and I could only give them 2 because that's all I can't go any higher than that. And so the bed space is kind of at a premium, and they're willing to pay the additional cost.
And that's the other thing. I think the timing, in retrospect now, obviously hindsight being 2020, the timing was great, because at the time at the time it was built, there wasn't really the demand for these facilities that there needed to be. But that has changed dramatically.
Absolutely.
With some of the new legislation and what the state's doing. Now these places are very much in demand.
Well, juvenile justice realignments definitely increased, the pressure to find housing. And then we benefited from the same grant that a lot of other counties did. The state, offered money to counties like ours that didn't have a juvenile facility or were in need of a new one to build new ones and provide that additional service. And so we did. And there was a short period of time where there were too many beds out there. But since then, no, there've been a lot of closures throughout the state, and so counties have been forced to go regional like we are. Or to shut down portions of their facilities and just run what they have. And right now, bed space is at a premium. And counties that have facilities aren't necessarily welcoming other counties to take their kids. And
that kind of goes to why that center was built in the first place. How did we treat juvenile offenders before we had our own local juvenile facility?
Well, there was a variety of different ways that we had to house them elsewhere, all over the state, pretty much.
And how far are we talking?
Well, we had contracts with Trinity County, which I don't even know if people know where that's at. It's way the heck out there. I've been there like once, and
it's 8 hours.
It's a ways.
One way, maybe one.
We had. We used Yolo County. They've since closed their facility, and we used Nevada County a lot. Nevada County has since closed their facility down. So, the people that we were contracting with, their bed space doesn't exist anymore. And so, that was one of the factors too, is that we really did try to come up with a closure plan. I wanted to come up with a plan to keep us open, and I wanted to come up with a closure plan in case the board didn't decided to close us, because I didn't really know where they were going to go at that time. And so we really put a lot of time and energy into getting quotes from other counties and putting together what would it look like if we did close, where would we send our kids. So we know what those costs would have been, and so that's why we can say we know we're saving money now. So it was a temporary period of time where the cost of juvenile hall beds really dropped, and it's not the case anymore. So.
Well, really, you've done a lot of good things with the juvenile center, and you have just, I'm over there fairly often, talking to the staff and the team, and it's just really, really dedicated people.
I'd love to take responsibility for that, but I really can't.
You're the one that's here, so
exactly. I really do have to give a shout out to my superintendent, Annie Hockett. She's the assistant chief. She does a wonderful job.
She was the one that gave the presentation on child abuse awareness.
Yes. She's the chair of the Prevent Child Abuse Tuolumne County, and she does so many great things in the community. Former social worker, former behavioral health worker. She was our first clinician in the facility. and she agreed to become a probation officer so she could potentially, become superintendent or work in a more management-oriented capacity. And she's definitely dedicated to providing the best level of service, and we're very fortunate to have her.
It's pretty fascinating, the skill set that you would need to be a good probation officer, especially when you're dealing with juveniles. You got to be tough, because some of the kids are tough as well, but you can't be too tough. You have to have those qualities that you would think of in a social worker.
It's not for everyone.
But it's also there's law enforcement involved.
Yeah, and it's tough too. I mean, that's why some of our juvenile officers don't stick around too long. And our
that's a problem. Is that a problem everywhere? It's hard to get people to stay.
For sure. And our board has come a long way in making sure that we have competitive wages just recently, and so I appreciate that too. Recognizing the hard work that we do, and it is a position that you don't really need a college education for. You can start out as a juvenile correctional officer and have a good wage, but you have to have the right temperament for it. You have to be able to, work almost like a parent with these youth, and you can't use corporal punishment. But sometimes the youth, they want to go hands-on or they want to get violent with each other, and you have to be able to intervene and keep them safe and contain them. And you have to, our youth come with some very disturbing problems, and so it's not an easy job.
And that's really interesting, saying that you have to be a parent, because a lot of these kids maybe didn't have a parent role model or very, a lot of parental involvement. And I just think about, with my kids, it's like you have to be loving, and you have to be caring, and you have to be there. You have to be a shoulder to cry on and listen to your children. But I notice that if I'm very, I don't know if strict is the right word, if I'm very consistent about what I expect and, what I want to see, they may not like it in that moment, but overall they are happier.
Right.
Because it's like they can see that, somebody is in control and somebody knows what the right thing to do is. And so if I follow their lead, I'll be on the right path.
Yeah, and there's ways that, we have a behavioral incentive program in the facility that it works. Shockingly, we've sort of always started there, and we're sort of at the forefront, I would say, whereas a lot of juvenile facilities throughout the state are trying to get to where we're at with things, where if you go in our facility, there's a large housing unit, and it's open. The youth are out and about. They're doing various different things. They're involved, and to manage youth and make sure that bad things aren't going on, you have to have some means of doing it. And we try to focus on positives, they get points for doing good things. Staff are recognizing, hey, you did a great job today. Here's some extra points or whatever. And we try to be very consistent about it. Just like, parenting, you have to be consistent. Yeah. But the positives go a long way to changing behavior, and we really see that with our youth. They like being safe. They want a place where they can flourish and function, and that's what the facility provides. And it's
kind of get them out of that environment that they were in.
And you could really see the transformation over time too with the youth. I mean, they come in, they're angry, they're agitated, they may be coming off of drugs, and they don't want to listen to us. It's F you or whatever. And so there are, they lose points, but then, over time they start to buy into the system, and they start to function like, normal youth, the normal, and we're working towards, making them independent and having the capability of being released to get jobs, and depending on their level of detention, like our camp program right now, we're focused, on getting education squared away, whether it be at the junior college or getting their high school diploma. And then we focus on getting them jobs, and, they can be released into the community to work. And we've had a number that do that. They're being furloughed to either college or to their jobs, and they're working. And they're saving money, and they're preparing for life on the outside.
Once you're an adult, it's very hard to change.
Yeah.
Once you're on that path, I mean, people do it,
yes,
and people absolutely should try it, but it is much easier to change your path when you're
Absolutely.
a child or a teenager or not quite an adult yet, because you aren't really who you are yet. And so you're kind of getting the kids in this last window where you have a chance to move that needle in the right direction.
It can be very challenging, but you're right. I mean, this is the chance. This is the
So
best
it seems like
opportunity.
a lot of
we have.
responsibility too.
It is. I mean, it's challenging for sure. But I mean, it's also rewarding because we do see kids succeeding. We do see people in our community doing better than they ever have. We're not seeing the same level of, going from one system to the other. I mean, it used to be really a really sad affair. I mean, when I was a juvenile probation officer, my first 5 years on the job, we were taking kids all over the place. We used San Joaquin County Juvenile Hall a lot, Yolo County, and our kids often were preyed upon. And so either to survive, sometimes they had to join gangs, or that's how they felt.
And then they'd come back and bring that with.
Exactly.
And that was,
And we're very fortunate not to really have that, gang element here.
Yeah.
And I think, having that juvenile hall is a big part of it now, to get past that and, where there isn't that level of attraction or need, and we were seeing that too. I mean, our youth, when we would put them, in Stockton, French camp, they'd come back almost kind of like it was a badge of honor or something. And, it's not the kind of thing we want them to be learning, those kinds of antisocial skills and, joining gangs.
Going to con college, I guess.
Right. Not what we want to do.
Yeah.
And, I think you can't really put a price tag on that in terms of, what kind of criminal involvement that person's going to have lifelong until they, wake up and start to get it straight, if they ever do.
Yeah.
But, I think we're not seeing that now. And that was the vision of having our facility here all along. So when you say it's controversial, it was never controversial to me. I understand the fiscal piece, it was controversial. But even at the time when we were proposing it, the cost for juvenile hall beds was so high, that it was completely unexpected when the prices just kind of dropped because there was a glut of facilities out there. But that's not the case anymore, and it really quickly turned around. Yeah. So, anyways.
Well, Dan Hawks, I have tremendous respect for you and what you do and your team, and I really appreciate you coming here, talking about what probation does. I feel like I learned a lot. Hopefully you did too. And please come back anytime.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate being here. Thanks, Ryan.
Have a good one.
You too.
Thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate you being here. Please join us again next week on The Conversation when we talk about Tuolumne County and all the wonderful things that go on here. Take care, everyone.